Okay, looks like I'm recording. So, basically, it's been a little while since we started talking about this, so I'll just give not like it's a debate or anything like that, but I'll just give a little opening statement. I'm hoping to have a series to complement the Ask Ancap show where I'm basically going to just have conversations with people. I don't care much for the debate format, so I don't really want to frame it that way. But, when you're talking to people with different opinions, it's probably going to go that way. Um, so I've been spending a lot of time over the last years studying Austrian economics and uh, rubbing shoulders with people like Liquid Zulu who know a lot about the legal and ethical side of things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that when you get into a conversation, you're going to be able to, you know, that studying is going to manifest into some kind of actual, I don't know, efficiency, proficiency. So hopefully, by having conversations with people, I'm going to discover my own weaknesses. That is my motive here. So I'm hoping I look back on this in a couple of weeks or months and say, "Geez, I'm so much smarter than I was then." Hopefully. Um, and when we originally spoke, I think what we were going to go with as a tentative topic was just taxation is theft.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to use this whiteboard here, and that might slow me down a little bit. I apologize if that gets aggravating. I can do it less if it slows me down more than I expect. What I'd like to do is instead of jumping right into taxation as theft, let's just talk about um, our grounding for how we get to these things. I'm going to talk about how I get to property rights. Maybe you can share how you get to property rights, and we can go through the chain, see where we agree, and then see where things start breaking down. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, sure. Do you mind if I just give like a short opening statement of my own before we get into it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I didn't prepare anything, but yeah, so I go by Lumethos online. I used to be a libertarian, very big into libertarianism when I was a little bit younger. I moved away from it. Hopefully, we can get into why. But I mean, in reality, I all of my answers to all these questions in reality would be Christian ethics because I'm a Christian ethicist. I'm going to try to approach this from a secular angle. I don't know um, how you'll feel about my answers on certain things, but they are my honest. Like if I was not a Christian, if I didn't hold to Christian ethics, this is exactly what I would say otherwise. And then if you have any questions about what kind of property rights Christian ethics entails, maybe we can get into that briefly. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about anything. But you said before that you don't really want to argue theology, and neither do I. So
Yeah, I think if we go into a conversation with that's the explicit purpose ahead of time, that's not off the table. But for this time, I think we can probably compartmentalize that out. Okay, well, let me just say the floor is yours. Then, if you want to go first and just give me your, how you get to property rights and everything like that, we can start there. Or if you prefer, I can go first. I'll let you decide.
um, you can go first.
Alrighty. So let's just do this. I've never attempted this method before, so bear with me. Let's see what we do agree on. So we both agree that we exist as individuals.
That
Um,
is true.
okay. And we both agree that reality exists. And I'm not trying to be sneaky philosophical here. I just mean like the world that we have in common exists.
Sure, I'll grant that.
All right. And let's see. Next, if we exist and the reality exists. So just by saying we, multiple individuals, let me try this. So one of the attributes that reality has is scarcity. And since we exist and reality and scarcity exist, the possibility of conflict is present. So that would just be mutually exclusive implementations of the same resources. Are you with me so far?
Sure.
All right. Now, when I say "are you with me," I don't mean like you understand me. Just is there any is there agreement? Is all I
Mhm.
mean by that. Okay. So we have the possibility of conflict. All right. So now conflict is, and I we can go down this as sort of a diversion, but conflict is bad. And why is it bad? It's because it undermines our ability to attain our ends. So when we say we exist, it's not merely that we're present, but I think also that maybe it's even a hidden implication in there. But we have ends, um, and conflict undermines those ends. So maybe I should write that down. The conflict interferes with ends attainment. All right. So the question is, do we want to avoid conflict? And I have a feeling that this is where it might start to break down.
Yeah, you're already losing me a little bit, or wherever you're going to go next is going to lose me a little bit.
All right. So wait, before I go next and lose you, are you with me up to this point at least?
Um, well, you said conflict is bad. You already said that one, so you lost me there. But then you just said that conflict interferes with ends attainment, which is sometimes true.
Right, right. So, like for example, you could be, if you're, and we'll just let me just permit me to use the desert island analogy just because it's
Sure.
fun and it's simple. Um, so, if you're the biggest guy on the desert island, then conflict doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean that you're losing your ends attainment. It just means that someone is losing, but it's not necessarily you.
Yeah, absolutely. So like conflict. So someone has to have their ends interfered with during conflict, but it wouldn't. Given that I'm only coming at it from my frame of reference, like if you've picked up the stick and I want the stick, giving you the stick also interferes with my ends attainment. So I might as well do conflict.
So basically, I feel I understand what you're putting out there.
Yeah.
Uh, so you could be the big guy who's winning all the conflicts. And I do want to say it's probably worth pointing out here too that conflict being a state of mutual exclusivity between two uses is a little different than conflict as like a relationship between two people who are
Yeah.
feuding. So maybe there should be. I'll try to use the word feud. So like if me and you are not getting along on the desert island, we're in a feud. But let's say
Hmm.
conflict is just specifically these mutually exclusive um, pieces. Okay, so you might win all of your feuds, and in which case there's no reason to assume that conflict is automatically um, deleterious, let's say. And so I
Yeah.
guess the question would be, from your point of view, why should I pursue conflict avoidance if um, I'm winning all the conflicts?
Um, yeah, that question doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The answer is just, well, firstly, under if I was approaching this from a secular angle as I am, I don't really believe in the concept of like a should. Like, why should you do this? There's no objective reason to do anything. It just may be the case that some conflict avoidance would be net beneficial, but you don't. It's not even the case that you should do things that are beneficial. It's just like that. It's if it's beneficial to you, that's probably what you're going to do.
Sure. Well, will you accept it then if I approach it this way? So you have ends,
Yep.
and when I say should, what I mean is relative to the attainment of your ends.
Yeah, sure. So the only reason then to pursue conflict, or sorry, to pursue conflict avoidance would be that it could be the case that conflict entails so many other issues in a certain circumstance that it's not actually worth conflicting. Like if you have a very small stick and I want the very small stick and we get into an insane brawl over it and we both break our arms, that wasn't really worth the stick.
Right. But if you are confident you're going to break my arm without any risk to yourself, then you don't really feel the same incentive.
Yeah, well, because then my ends is that I want the stick, and my means is that I can have it safely.
Right. So let me. This isn't meant to be a refutation, but I want to sort of just pick your brain on this. So let's say you're on a
Hmm.
desert island, and if you are, the desert island is meant to um, be an analogy. I'm simplifying things here. I don't think anything that's true of the desert island isn't true of a more complicated society. I do think it's just a little bit less obvious. But so I'm going to make the attempt with the desert island analogy, regardless. If you're on the desert island and there's a number of people besides yourself, maybe it's just two, maybe it's 10 or 20, but the point is you're on a desert island with other people. Where does your ends attainment come from? Your end attainment, the attainment of your ends has to come from the employment of the scarce resources in your environment. I think you'll agree with me with that, at least.
Yeah, that would seem to be the case. Sure.
All right. So if like for the sake of specificity in the economic domain, we could argue, or I could say, like, there's a way of classifying those scarce resources. So you got consumers' goods, which are those goods that directly satisfy your end through their employment, and then you've got producers' goods or capital goods, which are going to be the ones that bring about the consumers' goods eventually. So the reason I'm bringing economics into this is because there's one more important aspect to bring into this, and this is where I want to go with this. So if you are the biggest guy, let's just say you're on the desert island, and the situation for you is such that it's absolutely without contest that you could beat any individual other person up. So there's no way that any of them could harm you, essentially. And if that's the case, why avoid conflict? Why not just take what you need? But ends attainment, because it comes from the employment of these scarce resources, there's sort of a relationship here where capital, produced factors of production. So all that would mean is, you're on the beach. Here's a stick that I could use to, shake berries out of a bush. Here's a rock that I could, throw at Anthony, right? But if you want to turn that stick into a spear, then you're talking about the formation of capital, which requires saving, which means you have to consume less than you could have, which is a form of sacrifice. You're giving up ends attainment. And there's risk involved too. You could fail, or someone could take the stick, which we'll come back to. Point is, through the creation of capital, there's like an enormous increase to the amount of ends that you could achieve. So if you're going around beating people up, taking their stuff, you're actually very strongly and aggressively disincentivizing the creation of capital. Again, capital being the man-made producer's goods. So there's still a very real sense where, and I'm only using should here in relation to your the fact that you have ends. So if you want to achieve as many ends as you want, or as many of your most valued ends, you don't want to be in a situation where the only things at your disposal are, the fish that wash up on the shore, or the clams, or the crabs, or sticks and rocks, because through collaboration, through things that we have uncovered through economics, that'd be like the law of association, the law of comparative advantage. Hopefully I don't have to get into those because there's numbers in them. I'm bad at numbers. But my point is that there's an enormous exponential increase in what you can do through cooperation and through conflict avoiding forms of collaboration. So all that is, I didn't want to just say it without giving you some specific meat on the argument, but I'll wrap it up now. My point is, by being aggressive, you're fighting against the creation of capital, which means that even if you can see all of the ends that you can perceive on the island, and nobody on the island is able to pose a threat to you in your doing so, it's still the case that you are causing yourself to have far fewer of your ends attained than otherwise would have come about had you been cooperating with the people around you.
Yeah, that's an interesting argument. I hesitantly have a few objections insofar as you might believe that this entails anarcho capitalism, right? So I don't. Here's what I don't object to. I don't object to the fact that it is the case that cooperating with people can be extremely beneficial for you, right? And so this is why I said earlier, the only reason to pursue conflict avoidance would be that, like, it's just easier, right? It can just be super awesome if everybody works together, and there's, you don't have any, you're not wasting any capital, for example, doing the fighting, right? You're not wasting any time or labor or anything. So that's cool. I guess here are some of my objections. For example, if there's a guy on the island and he's just doing nothing all the time, and then I go beat him up because he's doing nothing, like, that's an act of aggression. But I haven't really disincentivized anything. If anything, I've actually incentivized something, because I'm telling him that if he doesn't start producing goods, I'm going to keep beating him up. Like, I don't see how that's not in my self-interest to do if I want everybody on the island to produce the maximum number of goods. And then the other thing would be, okay, even if that that isn't the case, even if that somehow does disincentivize people, if my preferred thing, like, it's possible that I have a moral framework. It would be a kind of fictitious moral framework, right? Like, we already agreed that it's more like a useful fiction, and that when we say the word should, it's just to whatever end you've designated. But as long as one of my ends, I'm willing to sacrifice some generated capital for this end, I don't see how I'm then why it would then be good for me to not aggress. Like, if I really, really didn't want people to write with their left hand, and then I just started beating up people who write it with their left hand, or wrote with their left hand, this may reduce the amount of capital generated. But if I'm okay with that, I just don't see how this argument would address that issue.
Yeah, if I understand you correctly, there you're appealing to the subjective nature of ends, such that, if, like, I'm not trying to mischaracterize here, but just to make sure I'm really getting it. If you did, like, let's take the enslaving people to use them for capital formation out of it for a second. If you did, if you're on a desert island and you perceive, okay, I can take whatever I want, but by taking whatever I want, nobody will ever build anything, so we'll just be stuck in this, like, primitive state. But conceivably, I can enjoy being the top dog so much that I actually prefer to stay in this primitive state, and be the top dog.
Yeah, well, that would be one example, but I prefer the kind of left-hand example, because I could just have a totally arbitrary preference that people don't do something, and then most people are still going to be producing a reasonable amount of capital, and even if it's the case that I have to beat up one guy here or there because he's writing with his left hand, but that's what I want to do. But it's not like the amount of capital generated is going to go to zero because of that. And so, as long as I'm willing to sacrifice whatever the economy that I've sacrificed is, I don't see how, as long as that's within my ends, I feel like that would actually be a good thing.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm not trying to suggest that capital will go to zero. I was just trying to make sure I was identifying all the isolated functional components there. So it is the
Yeah.
case you could conceivably sacrifice some of the ends that are going to go unfulfilled due to less capital being formed because of your coercive influence in the society.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just sort of ask this too, because I feel like I kind of got us off on the wrong foot here. I should have specified when we're going through this whether or not we're talking about an ethical or a legal or an economic sort of argument, because I guess it's kind of up in the air right now. And I don't think it's wise for me to continue to try and go down this train of thought without saying, am I making an ethical argument or an economic argument? Because right now, so this argument I made about capital formation, I think, was sort of an economic argument. This is an economic reason why you shouldn't transgress against somebody.
Yeah.
And I think now that I'm reflecting on this, I'm looking at this sort of train of thought and thinking, well, this is, I feel comfortable that this is actually still going to be a potentially fruitful path to go for the economic argument. But I am interested in the ethical argument as well. So if your permission, with your permission, I'd like to just put a pin in that right quick, and then sort of take a slight pivot to the ethical angle on this same topic.
Sure.
So this is what I said at the beginning. To study something is so gratifying when you just sit down and you're like, oh man, I get this. And then when you're in the moment, you have to actually talk about it. It's such a different thing. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to practice this. Okay, so on ethics, do you have any sort of interest in objecting to somebody else enslaving you? Or is it your position, and I'm not suggesting these are the only two options, but or are you more in the direction of if somebody enslaves you, then it's fair game because of the fact that they by virtue of the hypothetical, they must have vested you in some sort of physical competition?
Yeah, well, I feel obligated to just remind the audience that I actually do have a real moral objection to slavery, which would be rooted in Christian ethics. But again, taking that out of it, it would only be the case that when you say like, well, they've bested me, so now they get to enslave me, it doesn't really work like that. It would just be the case that I would prefer not to be enslaved for whatever reason, and they would prefer to enslave me. And maybe if the shoe was on the other foot, maybe what I would prefer to enslave them, or maybe not. But they certainly would prefer not to be enslaved.
Right. So I prefer not to be enslaved as sort of like a descriptive statement, but it's not a normative statement.
Yeah, I don't really believe in under the secular framework. I don't really believe in normative statements. Only as a means to an end, right? So if my end was not to be enslaved, then I would say it's bad to enslave me. But I couldn't prove to you that you ought not enslave me.
Okay. Well, I'm actually kind of satisfied to leave it there. And if we can, after I finish this thought, I'll give you the opportunity to take the conversation somewhere that you'd like to go. But the reason I'm satisfied to leave it there, and I want to be transparent about this, is because if you're not, so you're sort of describing yourself, and just to be a little bit, maybe this is just for the sake of being polite, but I'm going to sort of separate you, like the real life person, from maybe a caricature of you, just for the sake of, I don't want to sound like I'm being mean or anything like that, but like the argument you're putting forward here of the hypothetical, like the position of other than like in a secular sense, there's no norms whatsoever, other than descriptive statements about preferences. Then for me, what I would like to put out into the world isn't necessarily like, because I have you've probably spoken with objectivists before. I don't really want to, for my personal goals, say here's the objective argument that absolutely irrefutably establishes that you have to have this norm. Rather, I would like to say at a bare minimum, there's people who want to cooperate with each other and people who don't want to cooperate with each other. And what does it look like when somebody doesn't want to cooperate with each other? Then they have no, to say I have no secular objections to being enslaved. I can only describe myself as not being enslaved. Well, to me, that is the exact same as saying I am choosing not to participate in any norms. And of course, I understand that there's a religious aspect of this for you, but it seems to me that even if a norm isn't grounded in anything, you still ultimately, or even if it is grounded in something, norms are something you choose to follow. Maybe I'm going to say this, and I hope that I don't accidentally send us down the religious topic prematurely, but even if everybody was born with certain knowledge that there was a God, they had no doubt, you could still conceivably act contrary to God's prescriptions and proscriptions, and that would be an indication of the fact that participating in a norm is a voluntary thing. It's a choice that you make. Um, and I only mean to say that in my only point in bringing that up is to say that that's true of the secular system, with or without the involvement of the God element. So, I guess to me, you're saying about yourself that you choose not to participate in any norms. Because if I put out there, well, we can just not enslave each other and we can just participate in the norm, you're saying I refuse. I'm not participating in that. Um, and I guess I'm curious about why that is. Do you think that your lack of participation in norms is coming from you have a preference that you prefer not to be that way, or is it because you've been convinced of something about norms? Like there's a belief that you have that says I shouldn't participate in norms.
Yeah. Well, firstly, it's definitely not the last one because that would be a normative statement, right? I should not participate in norms. Itself is normative.
Sure, that's fair.
I'll leave the religious topic alone. I do have some stuff to say about that, but I'll let it slide. The you mentioned quite a few things there, so I'm just trying to get my head in order.
Sure, sure.
You said I don't participate in norms. I guess we just need to be very clear about like different types of norms because it's not clear to me that all norms are the same. For example, one could prefer truth seeking, and so then it would entail that you ought not beat up the person who you're trying to get the truth from, because instrumentally to the end that you've designated, that would not be very useful. But you couldn't prove objectively that you ought to engage in truth seeking. Like that's not a norm that exists anywhere in the real world, relative to a secular framework at least. And you might say relative to a religious one, but again, I'll leave that alone. And then, sort of similar to this, some people would say that logic itself is normative. So like, if P implies Q and P, it just is the case that Q, right? But the problem is that logic is normative in a descriptive way. Like it doesn't tell you that you have to believe Q if you already believe P implies Q and P. But like you couldn't force someone or obligate someone to take that to its logical conclusion. It just sort of describes the world that, well, if these two propositions are the case, then this third proposition is also the case. And so that's what I would call like a logical norm. But the kind of, I guess what we're trying to get at would be ethical norms is like the third category where you as an agent ought to behave in a certain manner, like objective or independent of any particular preference that you have. And under the secular framework, I definitely don't see a reason for that. And you asked me why wouldn't I, right, engage in a norm? Is it because I'm sort of convinced that there are no norms? Well, not necessarily. I'm just not convinced that there are any.
Sorry. So I heard a lot of what you were saying there about norms are going to be established through some sort of process. So I value truth seeking, I value strawberries, etc. Like there's a value, there's some sort of preference, and then you can there's nothing objective about those, but then you can establish objective inferences or implications by those. So because I value truth, I shouldn't beat people up as a way of getting to truth because that's not a reliable pathway to truth. And I'm with you there because I'm not an objectivist, so I get that. I'm with you on the same page there. But then the last thing you said invoked a spark, an idea, and then I forgot what it was. Can you repeat the most recent point that you made?
I'll repeat. There were two. I'll just repeat them both.
Sure.
So the second last point was just like there aren't really any objective norms that could compel you to like believe in any third proposition or force you to value X and then act instrumentally towards X. And then the very last point was you asked me why don't I believe in norms? Have I been convinced of something around this topic? It's more the case that I haven't been convinced that norms exist than that I have been convinced that they don't exist.
Yeah, so norms haven't met their burden of proof to you yet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, under all of this is under the secular umbrella, sure.
Sure, absolutely. And I know that if you're a religious person, obviously the religious aspect of your worldview is pretty important. So
Yeah,
I don't mind you um, reiterating that for the sake of clarity. I think that's appropriate. Um, so it's kind of curious to me that you would say that that norms haven't been shown to exist to you to your satisfaction yet, because so you and I are on the same page that a norm is sort of subjective and not objective in its nature. So we've got all these sorts of things floating around, like I like strawberries, therefore I should grow strawberries rather than destroy the strawberry patch or something like that.
yeah,
Um, but there's no, for me, the norm is in the connection between the starting point and the implications. So when you see, for example, you and I are external observers to the universe, and we look at and we see a desert island, and there's these 10 people, and they've all decided that they have to any pink seashells they find, they have to throw back out into the ocean, and that's a norm that they're following. Well, the norm certainly exists in the sense that um, it's there are people instantiating that norm. They're acting on it. They're making choices and decisions around that norm. So it certainly exists in that sense. Um, and I have to assume you agree with me about that.
yeah.
So so I guess I can infer that the aspect of the norm that you're contending doesn't exist is the objective basis or grounding for it.
Yeah, so maybe I wasn't super clear because again, there are these like three notions of norms. There was the logical norm I described. There's the instrumental norm, which we also covered, so that if you want something, there are things that are going to get you to that end. But then there's this third category, which I was talking about mostly in that last statement, which is like an ethical norm, which would be a norm such that you are actually bound to it, whether or not you like it. So that would be like a more moral, realist framework where it would be wrong, potentially, for example, if your moral realism valued truth seeking. We'll just use the example on the page. It would actually be wrong to disprefer truth seeking. And so you're bound to the norm, whether or not you prefer truth seeking, you have to prefer it. That would be like an objective, moral, realist, ethical norm. And that's just the kind of norm I'm saying. I don't think that exists. And so every other norm is only going to be relative to an end. And you can always just pick any end.
So you don't deny logical and instrumental norms.
No, not at all. I mean, even logical norms, I'm not even sure if they're normative, right? They're almost descriptive. Like, as I mentioned before, people call them logical norms, but if P implies Q and P, it's not normative that Q is also true. It just is that Q is also true. And then if you value certain things, you might choose to believe that.
I'm not sold on the instrumental norm thing at face value, because if it's like the instrumental norm, what's making it an instrumental norm is that the person has some kind of presupposition in the first place, and
Yeah,
then the norm is the connection between the presupposition and the other thing.
yeah.
So I guess the difference between that and an ethical norm is an ethical norm that doesn't have a presupposition.
An ethical norm would be one that you're bound to, whether or not you like it, basically.
Okay, I would just say I don't believe in those either.
Well, I think we're in agreement then. But would you agree, for example, that when most, the average lay person on the side of the road, when they say that murder is wrong, they don't mean that murder is instrumentally wrong if your goal is to maximize capital generation or have a stable society. They just mean it's always wrong, and that no one should ever do it for any reason. And that's like, whether or not you think that's true, that's what they're referring to. Most people do believe in ethical norms.
I guess so.
Yeah. So that's the level where I think we agree may not actually exist. But then I think we agree that the logical and instrumental norms actually exist.
Well, yeah, I think, like, for example, so it's got to be true of anything that's, well, I'll just keep it simple and talk about human beings here. I won't do the, maybe animals or maybe aliens thing. Let's talk about humans. So if you're a human being, it has to be true of you that you have ends at the very least. So there's like a real true thing there that's really close already, because the instrumental norm is just taking these presuppositions, and then it's saying, well, if X, therefore Y. I was using the strawberry patch example, but I'm sure there's even clearer examples. If you like not being hurt, don't stick your hand on the stove. I wish
Yeah.
5-year-old me had access to that instrumental norm. But so that's like a completely adequate framework. But then we look at human beings, and I think that the elements of human beings that I'm talking about now are readily available to us just by virtue of being alive. I haven't met a person yet. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I've met people who may or may not have been serious about doubting their own existence. But okay, so I'm a real person. I have ends. Um, Already, the field of praxeology would argue that there's an entire scientific field that comes out of just analyzing the consequences of that one single observation. So a single presupposition can go a long way. And we know, because we're humans, that we have this thing that's true about us, which is that we have ends. So I guess as far as norms go, I'm sure we're going to find agreement here. If you have 10 people on a desert island, and 9 of them come to the conclusion, and they don't have to actually do this through the exact wording I'm using, but they come to the conclusion, hey, I got ends that I want to have, and my name is Tim, but Shirley over there, she has a clamshell that I'd really like to put on my head. But if I just let her keep that clamshell, then we're going to be able to get a lot more. I can get the clamshell, but then we're not going to cooperate anymore. But if we cooperate, I'm going to get a lot more. But then you get this one person outside of the 9, and he is just saying, actually, I'm thinking about just, enslaving or taking whatever I want by force. So to me, the difference is that those 9 people are collaborating in something that has a basis. It has an objective basis in reality, and it also has an objective connection from their presupposition to the normative, let's say, prescriptions. So that's pretty satisfying for me, right there. And then I guess I'm going to fail to make a positive conclusion here in this sort of formal debate sense, but um, it's satisfying enough for me to say I'm really interested in people who want to participate in the voluntary society. And what I mean by that is just human beings agreeing to cooperate together. I'm interested in people who have that presupposition and they've been misled about the implications. So a lot of people say, I want to live in a society, I want to cooperate with other people, but I believe taxation is a good idea. And then I can argue, well, hey, there's a contradiction there. But then if I meet somebody who says, I don't want to cooperate with other people using a framework, I'm a predator, I'm not participating in any sort of norm whatsoever. And I'm not saying this of you, because I understand that you've got this sort of theistic external way to introduce that.
Yeah.
But for me, there are these people out there that are predator-like in that sense. They're saying, I am not going to make those sacrifices, other than to the extent that's required for me to preserve my camouflage. And they're playing this sort of game where they're keeping up their camouflage just enough to uh, get as many ends as possible, while also not in any serious way observing the norm. Um, just saying that this doesn't apply to them. They have, for whatever reason, they've subjectively exited the whole framework of cooperation. But then, what's kind of curious to me about this is if there was such a person, I guess I would never be able to talk to them seriously anyway, because I'm not trying to do argument. confrontation ethics here, but if that's their approach is not participating in the norms, they wouldn't really have any reason to argue with me other than as a sort of expression of their instrumental belief that arguing is going to either uphold their disguise or that it might just save them the trouble of the conflict if they can just convince me to give something up. Um, Otherwise, I guess that's all I have to say about that. Here, I give the floor to you.
Man, I should really be taking notes. You said a lot there again. I guess the one thing that really stuck out to me was you said that the 9 people on the island, something about their system is like objective and real, and as if it's somehow more real than the 10th guy, who's just like, I'm gonna like slavery is still real. It's as much real as putting a clamshell on your head, and
I didn't mean to
maybe the
imply that.
9 are gonna win. Maybe the 9 are gonna win because there's a lot of them, but there's if you're like an 11th person, and you're stepping onto the island, there's no reason as such to pick one or the other. It's just whatever you already prefer, and then that's going to be the norm that you behave with when you're on the island, right? Are you going to go with the 9, or maybe you're going to try to go with the 1? So yeah, that was just one thing that stuck out to me. I guess I don't know if you meant it in that way.
No, I didn't. What I mean to say is it's satisfactory to me to start from the position that his presupposition of indulging in conflict is equal in the sense that it's his starting point, it's his presupposition. So it's one presupposition against another. I'm satisfied to grant that of him, that they're equal in that sense, that they're both presuppositions.
Sure.
I wouldn't grant that they're equal in the following sense. Since we're talking specifically about instrumental norms, I would say that norm is disastrously counterproductive to oneself. But that is that topic would be between the starting point and the outcome in an instrumental way, right? So then we'd just be talking about, well, is it or is it not the case that operating on this norm of this pro-conflict norm is counterproductive? And I guess that's just a matter of instrumental analysis. But
Sure.
I think they are equal as both being presuppositions.
Yeah, I think that we would agree on this. I just want to make sure it's very clear. You said like you use a word there, counterproductive, but again, counterproductive is only relative to a norm. So if the norm was like I'm going to enslave everyone or die trying, there is no counterproductivity here. Trying to enslave everyone would in fact be the entailment of your presuppositions.
Yeah, if you're a human being whose end is, I would prefer to enslave everybody or die trying over any other course of action that I could employ. That's fine for me. Like I think that what happens is in that case is not that my motive, I guess, would really not be to try and argue with such a person, because you're actually saying in this hypothetical, this person can't be reasoned with is built into the hypothetical. So it leaves the other people, even if it's just myself, in a situation where there isn't really way, I can't make sense of trying to refute him, his norm, because it's the case already that he's opted out of that participating in reason or anything. So I would just say that it is the case in the real world that there are pro-social and antisocial people, and I don't think we can bridge that gap. I think there's antisocial people who are that way mistakenly, but what we're talking about here hypothetically is not somebody who's mistakenly hypothetical. He's very deliberate in being antisocial. If I can't reason with him, then I think by definition the only thing I can do with him is non-reasonable things, which would just be, the application of force in self-defense or whatever. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I think so. It's, I mean, I guess I don't really object to that. I'm trying to think about what, I mean, I think we agree but again, that's sort of just what's going to happen given you have conflicting presuppositions, and he's just, he's got one that is absolutely contradictory to yours, and whoever's going to win is just going to be whoever can produce the most force. And obviously, if there's more people on your side, you're very likely going to be able to produce more force than he is, and then you're just going to throw him into the ocean, I guess. Yeah, I don't think we actually disagree on that at all, so I don't really know where we would go. Oh, there was one point you mentioned earlier about, I guess you were trying to tie this into like anarchism, voluntary society, about how like you're just not, like you just want to get a bunch of people who do agree with you together, and then maybe you can do something with it. But as long as it's the case that the majority of people are willing to engage in some coercion, and they're just completely happy with this system where you've got the state and the state just goes around coercing everybody, just as a descriptive reality, as long as that would be the case, and it currently is the case that the vast majority of people would rather have a state than no state, and they don't see any issue with that under their norms, then I don't really see where you're going to go with that. Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, there's all kinds of different ways to do it, but the situation, like the puzzle that's being put in front of me here that I have to solve, is a question of, okay, you live in a society, and here's the general attributes of the people. It's distributed over all of the people that are in the society. And what are some ways that I can go about arguing with the people who are in that society successfully from an instrumental point of view? I'm trying to change their minds about that stuff. So I'll give you a couple examples of where I come from. So I would presuppose, I consider it a valid presupposition that I don't want to be enslaved, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that presupposition is common to most people. So I would say, I don't want to be enslaved. So what I'm basically saying is I have use over my body, and other people don't have use over my body. So what's happening there is, at the most fundamental level, I'm distinguishing between who does and does not have the right to use something. And so, well, that really says, what is the actual framework of that distinction? And for me, that framework looks like this. So I know that I want to be able to use my own body. But if I have a rule that just says owners are able to use this thing and there's no other content in it, then that actually doesn't stop non-owners from using it. You need, like, the implication has to be that owners are the ones who can use it, non-owners can't use it. But then you also have another problem with that, where somebody could build a cage that they own and put it around you, and they're not actually doing anything to stop you from using your own. Like, they own the cage and you own your body, and you can use your body, but you're being blocked by their property. And that, I think, implies the third aspect of ownership, which is that you can't be alienated from your right to use justifiably. And so that's how I would, for somebody, like, I would say, I would just, for somebody who has that presupposition in common with me, then we can necessarily get to a framework of ownership. Because if they say, I don't want to be enslaved, but I don't actually have a concept of ownership. Well, if you're saying you don't want to be enslaved as a norm, then you have to be making this distinction. If you're just saying I prefer not to be enslaved, you're just making a descriptive statement. In which case, the person would be outside of my hypothetical, because it's no longer a person who's expressing this presupposition as a norm. They're just saying I prefer not being enslaved. Am I making sense so far?
Yeah, it sounds like you are going down the argumentation ethics route somewhat here.
I see the similarities, but
it's not strictly argumentation ethics, but it's very similar.
I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out argumentation ethics, and I just find it to be like, not gibberish, because I know how much work goes into it, but I just find it like completely unpalatable for most people to wrap their heads around, myself included.
Yeah, I did. I did do some research because I wasn't sure if you were going to bring it up. I mean, I have objections to it. I don't think it's gibberish. I just don't think it's a sound argument. But you mentioned earlier, you seem to connect the fact that you have use over your body with some kind of normative statement that you own your body, right? So ownership, as I understand it, it would be something like the exclusive, quote unquote, right to operate or use some kind of piece of property, and how do I put this? But I don't see, like, you seem to think that it's valid to just presuppose that you own your body.
No,
That's not
I don't want to
obvious
give you
to
that
me.
impression. I don't want to give you that
Okay.
impression.
Okay, you
Um,
can clarify.
I am not, so I don't want to give you the impression that the argument I'm making is this is true for everybody.
Okay.
Where my position is coming from is that I'm looking for other people who have enough in common with me that we can establish cooperation.
Sure.
And that basis, like the framework that I'm using to identify those people, is such that that anyone outside of that framework is essentially um, configured in such a way that they can't be reasoned with. So we had like the easiest, obvious example of that was the earlier hypothetical where we had somebody that just, um, they've just decided they're like, yes, I have ends. My end is chaos. They just can't be reasoned with, or domination or whatever. Then that person obviously just can't be reasoned with by definition, by their own definition. What I'm saying is, it's true, not of everybody automatically. It's true for those people who have in common with me that they have this sort of intuition about themselves being enslaved as wrong, and that's a different intuition from I don't. It's a very distinct definition from. Sorry, it's a very distinct intuition from I prefer not to be enslaved. Uh, what I'm saying is most people that I've spoken to, very close to all, will provide the intuition that they're saying for me, not myself now, but I'm speaking on this hypothetical other person's behalf. They would say for me, I take it as a presupposition that it is wrong to enslave me, and then I start working out from there. And then if I find somebody who says, for example, the inverse of that, I don't think it's the case that it's wrong to enslave me, then I would assume that that person has already defined themselves in such a way that it wouldn't be possible for me to reason with them because they're opting out of using reason as a pathway for that could ever possibly lead to cooperation.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that follows. So the first thing you said was that the people who don't share this presupposition that you have basically just can't be reasoned with. And that's true relative to you, but relative to other people who share their presuppositions, they could be reasoned with. It seems like it's just the case that you just can't reason people out of presuppositions. That seems like that's the whole content there. And also depending on how we're defining like slavery, if slavery is just the idea that I or someone else has the moral right to coerce you or use your body for some end that you don't like, I think most people, if I reasoned it out with them, they would say, actually, I think, that there are valid uses of this, and therefore it is the case that someone has the right to coerce me or use my body for an end I don't like.
Sure.
Like I think if you ask the average person, is it okay for someone to enslave you? They would say like, no, it's not, right? But then if you just ask them, is it ever could it be morally permissible that the government forces you to do something for a greater good? Like, I'm sure you would think this is bad, but there is generally decent support for the draft, for example, to defend a nation. I mean, it's not super high, and I think it's lower with younger generations, but even if it was only like 25%, you're talking about 25% of people who minimum think that it's acceptable for the government to essentially I would just say, yeah, it's a form of slavery. The draft is a form of slavery. And I think a lot of people would more people than you're estimating would agree that this can be permissible. And so I think if you went back, they would revise their statement originally.
Sure. Yeah, it's completely possible that that's the case. It's been my experience that so what I would say at face value is that you're referring to the possibility of an individual holding contradictory beliefs. I think we all struggle to have a worldview that doesn't contain, at least accidentally, some contradictory beliefs. And I think that this really invokes the psychological concept of cognitive dissonance and the discomfort that comes from being made aware that you hold to contradictory beliefs. So it's entirely possible that you're speaking with somebody, and after you make them aware of the fact that they support the draft, that they revise their original presupposition. And in doing so, they are no longer engaged in a contradiction, but now they're endorsing a sort of what I would say is an untenable, like a much less tenable framework. But I suppose that there's a lot of work for me to do to demonstrate that the presupposition that it's okay for me to be enslaved is inferior in ethical terms leaves me definitely having some more legwork to do to demonstrate that fully.
Yeah, sure. So you said one thing there. I actually am taking notes now. You said one thing that they revised the presupposition. I actually don't know if that's true. It seems to me that they just didn't have the presupposition and they thought they did. Like, beliefs are more subconscious than they are conscious, in my opinion. And so someone can believe that they can consciously think, I believe it's never okay to coerce somebody. But then they can actually believe differently. I mean, it's just maybe that's a semantic difference. I just thought that was worth pointing out, that you said that they revised the presupposition. I think that they actually just realized that they never believed it. And certainly they an okay definition of belief, you might disagree with this, but one definition is sort of like to act as if something is true. And so if they're acting as if it's true that it's okay to coerce people, it doesn't really matter what they say or what they think, because the belief in the actual cognitive structure is there, whether or not they know it. And then the second thing you said was that the framework is untenable. I mean, I guess, that might require a lot of elucidation. I don't know if you want to go into that, but I would disagree.
Sure. I think that would be really the substantial content of what we would move into for something more in the debate format. Certainly. So it's been about an hour exactly now. So yeah. I wanted to know if perhaps you'd be interested in if we can sort of do like a debrief. And if you're interested, maybe in a week or two or a month's time, we can revisit this with a more focused in topic and format.
Sure, if you'd like to.
Absolutely. Well, this is, I mean, what I want to...
Actually, can I just...
Sure.
I did have I don't know do you have like a time limit?
I don't have I don't have a hard time limit. There's definitely a bit of a soft time limit.
Well, I did have some questions that I wanted to ask you about.
Sure, yeah.
Libertarian property theory and how it works, even though I don't buy into it. And I don't, I think I've adequately defended what's called error theory, which is just the idea that there is no real norm. And I think, we sort of agreed on that instrumental norms are the only thing that exists. So I just wanted to ask you questions, if I could, about how libertarian property theory and kind of libertarian ethics work in practice?
Sure, I can do my darndest. Let me just say before we transition into this, my goal here is I want to create a series, and the series isn't like there's a lot of playlists out there on YouTube that are like debate playlists. Like this is all the debates that the person's been through. What I want to do is make a presentation out of my thought process as it develops. I don't want to put myself out there as somebody who's already figured everything out. My plan is to reflect on what has been revealed to me through this dialogue. As you know, I'm not as confident in it. I'm more confident in it than I should be, or that I need to brush up on the information. And so that is why I think a 1 hour is a perfectly good time limit for the other stuff we already talked about, because I'm kind of like at my limit already. Like, oh my god, I already realized so many things I got to go. Either I gotta like reevaluate them, or I have to, which may result in them being discarded, or I just have to, I think you get the idea. But answering questions, that's outside of my, my now full capacity for think. So I think I can do this for a little while. So by all means.
Yeah, well, like this might be more of a controversial topic, but for example, I guess I'll just start here. Like, how do contracts work in I'll just call it LPT for short, especially with as it relates to something that you've agreed to do in the future, but then you don't want to do. Like, can you be bound to do it?
Sure. Well, I want to say that I know that my co-host Liquid Zulu, if he ever watches this, is going to absolutely paddle me. He is contracts. He understands the law aspect of this way better than I do. I'm more interested in the economics. I'm big on the Austrian economic side of things.
Okay.
So what Zulu would say, and I don't want to butcher. I don't want to say what he would say and then butcher it. So the impression that I've gotten from Zulu is that a proper contract is limited in scope to a transfer of title over some scarcity. So contracts can't be anything other than, when these conditions are met, the ownership of this transfers from one person to another. And I understand also that in this context, there is no such thing as partial ownership. There's no such thing as a bundle of rights. So somebody might be like, I have the right to paint the house, you have the right to live in the house, he has the right to park in the driveway. That's not a thing either. There's just ownership. One person can own something. Ownership is always total. And contracts are describing the conditions in which people exchange that ownership. So in the simplest form, if you and I are trading an apple and an orange, then the contract is that you're transferring ownership of your apple, and the condition is that you're receiving an orange in return. So if I take the apple and then say, I'm not giving you the orange, then that contract is not fulfilled. The contract was that you were giving me the apple because you were receiving the orange. And the same is if I gave you an orange that was actually just a ball of styrofoam that was painted, and the contract was that you were getting a real orange, not just a ball, an orange painted ball, then that's fraud. And it's the same as theft, because you transferred the ownership in the context of the condition of receiving what you were expecting to receive. Because you never received it, you never transferred ownership. So as long as I'm holding the apple, I am I am in possession, wrongful possession of what remains to be your property. And then that's the basis, and essentially all the other contracts are in that exact same framework. But as you add more complicated things, then you get more complicated contracts. And the one other way that could look is, the example I've heard most often is, if I agree to paint your fence, and a contract could have it so that if I paint your fence by Friday, then I become the owner of $100 of yours, comes to me. So if I paint your fence and then you don't pay me, then $100 of your money becomes like just automatically becomes something that I own. And as long as you haven't transferred it to me, you're stealing from me in the exact same way as if you came into my house and took $100 out. And then I could put a condition on that, which is like, let's say, if you need the fence painted by Friday, or else there's going to be some kind of consequence for you. You could also say in the contract, if you don't paint the fence by Friday, then you, the contractor, owe me $50, and then the same is true in reverse, provided whether or not the work gets done. And I think that really gives you like the holistic view of what's at like what dynamics are at play here.
Sure. So, if a contract can, how do I put this? If a contract is only the transfer of ownership of a title, of some property, it seems like you're saying that example contract, it's not so much a transfer. It's not really like an exchange of services for goods. It's just an exchange of one good on the condition that a service has been completed. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't see anything.
But like legally that would be how it has to be constructed, because you're saying that the contract maybe couldn't. You're not actually exchanging the service, because the service is not actually a good. So it's more like you only complete the transfer of the title if the service is completed.
I mean, what I would just say to that is if we're if we're engaged in, or if we're participating in an exchange of goods, and the condition is a service, there's a very real sense in which it's still an exchange of, because let's say I paint your fence and you give me the money, then that was an exchange of a good for a service in every sense that I can think of that would be important.
Sure. I mean, I would agree. It's mostly a semantic difference. I'm trying to think about if that would have legal implications. I don't know if it would. But then, for example, would it be possible to just like to have a contract where it's like you perform service A and then I perform service B in exchange, and there's no transfer of ownership?
Well, what I think I've heard Zulu say in the past, and I do have to defer somewhat to his expertise on this topic, because I just think it'd be irresponsible for me not to. If you do a contract, for example, and it's like, okay, I'm going to paint your fence if you paint my fence, or something like that. It's probably the case that you've just actually got like an invalid contract, because like, okay, I don't paint your fence, and then what? Nothing. There's nothing that comes from that. Like, so basically the contract doesn't actually mean anything. Like, if a contract's a transfer of title, what was transferred in title? Like, neither of us are paying each other, and neither of us have like consequences for not going through with the contract. So I would think that this is an example of it's just not a contract. Now, it can be an agreement. Like, I could say to my girlfriend, hey man, I don't feel like taking the dog out. Will you take the dog out for me? And like later I'll throw on some food for us. That's an agreement. It's not a contract. So I think that's what we're looking at in that case.
Sure. And regarding the example, actually, if we go back to the original example where, maybe you've painted my fence and then I'm like, haha, screw you. I'm just not going to give you the $100. Are you under the property theory as described, given that it's actually your $100 now, and I'm in possession of it, are you able to take it by force?
Yes. Yeah, you're always able to do what you need to do to take something that is being wrongfully held by someone else.
Sure.
Now that might be, if we want to get into like where the weeds might be on that, I don't think that virtually any theory of libertarian ethics or law is going to say, well, the second that contract comes to maturity, I am now, until you find a way to get that money to me, I can just be like the Terminator and be hunting you down. That would be something that I think isn't an implication of the contract theory. Or let's say another thing is if you say, like, okay, the contract, and I am legitimately not planning on paying you. Okay, well, now can I actually just blow your house up with a nuclear bomb?
Yes.
So those are things that I think are not um, included in the theory. And the answer to that is this in both cases. Um, well, sorry, I wouldn't, instead of saying like this is the conclusive answer, let me just give you, I think this is the easiest way to understand why. If you, in a legal setting here, in a private law society,
Hmm.
is the person, or depending on the nuclear bomb, is the person's relatives, like the survivors, are they going to be able to make a case against you in the private court? So they can be able to say, um, you know, you shotgunned my dad because he didn't pay you instantaneously. There was no implication that he was planning on withholding the money. Everybody recognizes that actually transferring the money is a physical limitation of the reality. It's not a legal loophole. It's just like I have to hand the money to you. Um, so the legal court would say, do you have any proof? Like you just 12 gauged this guy. Uh, is there any reason at all? Is there any evidence whatsoever that he was like withholding your money willingly, that he was late on his payment? You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. And realistically, like obviously, there's just no forensic way you're going to do that. If you're just going around, um, or even if you just do it one time, if you just kill somebody on such a flimsy thing, then forensically speaking, of course, you can always come up with a hypothetical where it's like, what if we're the only two people who live within like 100-mile radius and there's no security cameras? But what I think it's important for people to realize is that in that case, you're describing forensics and you're actually describing a limitation of forensic science, but not a limitation of legal theory.
Yeah, sure. That's not the route I would have gone down. Because I mean, even a limitation on forensic science like that would apply to all systems, right? Like if you have a state arbitrator instead, if we're the only people in 100 miles and I go and gun him down, you're not really going to be able to do anything about it. You're not going to be able to prove it was me, right?
Precisely.
So, but then here's a question: like if let's say I've painted your fence, and then you say you're not going to pay me $100, and then like you actually tell me, you're like, haha, screw you, I'm not gonna pay you anything. And if you try to get it, watch out. Can I just like fly an FPV drone through your window and blow you up?
Um, you actually potentially could, but you'd have to construct an extremely tortured hypothetical. It wouldn't be the case that that's by any means a default situation. So the best rule of thumb to use to answer those kinds of questions is that now that force is permitted, it isn't as if you're in a cockpit and you get like HQ's like, okay, weapons free, and then all the guns come online. It's just like, hell yeah. What's happening is what is justified is force necessary to end the aggression, basically. Like, so we do have a non-aggression oriented legal system. So you're aggressing. Maybe this will be the best way to explain it. Like if you put your hand on my wrist, and I don't want your hand on my wrist, it's not weapons free. It's not immediately I can just pull out my switchblade and start stabbing you. What happens is, what's necessary to get your hand off my wrist? Well, in most cases, it's going to be, hey, like, don't do that. And let's say that the other person continues to not let go of your wrist. Already, kind of a rare situation, but not impossible, right? So let's say I'm like, okay, this person's not listening to me, and I'm grabbing. So I start punching them in the face as hard as I can, and I'm just wailing on this person, and they're still not letting go of me. Okay, an even more unrealistic situation now. But we're at that point now. So what's happening is I have this property in myself, and they're aggressing on me because of the mutually exclusive action that they're holding me. Um, they're violating my right to exclude them from using my body, and that's what's going to be relevant in the legal context, right? So, like for example, if your girlfriend comes up and she grabs your wrist and then you just turn around and Smith and Wesson her in the face, then the courts are going to have an extraordinarily simple and easy time being like there was absolutely nothing in the history of the human race that indicated that that was necessary to make her stop touching you.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm actually literally in a parking lot and a stranger is refusing to let go of me, and I've already told them to let go, I've already wailed on them, you know what I mean? By that point, it's extremely reasonable to assume that I'm in serious danger. And so if I stab that person to get them to let go of me, I mean, you could at that point you could be like, well, what if like do you want to stab them on the finger first? Like at that point, you just have to prove in a court of law, like, hey, I was like, are they going to believe me when I say that I was fearing for my life? And I would think the answer is yes. Now, if instead of a knife, if I am just some sort of drone enthusiast and the weapon that I have at my disposal is a Ukraine war style FPV drone, and
Yeah.
I'm somehow confident I'm not going to kill myself in the blast, then yeah, sure, why not? Why can't that be the weapon? Why can't it be a laser gun or a crossbow or just like get into a car and drive down the street and drag him behind me until he lets go? Like, why can't that be it? Of course, if I use an FPV drone and the shrapnel damages someone's car, there's a good chance that I'm liable for that, and the liability would look like, for example, um, one, was it necessary to use an FPV drone, like a grenade, to kill this person, to get them off of you and like damage all these other people's cars? I would say not, and I think that that's what the law would come up with the same conclusion.
Yeah, I mean that seems doesn't seem unreasonable. Um, I'm still very surprised that you couldn't have a valid contract where it's only services, but I guess it makes sense under the theory. It just doesn't seem super workable. But another,
Well, just think about it
um,
this way, like, because again, there's nothing about that being a bad agreement. Like, if I told my friend, like, hey, I'm gonna mow your lawn, and you're gonna give me some cookies, he doesn't give me the cookies, then he broke the agreement, and I'm gonna like him less as a friend. But
well, that's actually a contract, right? Because the cookies would be goods that you now own.
not necessarily, because it could be an agreement in the sense of like, uh,
But sure, I mean, we could just pick a simple one of like, I mow your lawn, you mow mine.
yeah, if you okay, so if you want to do it that way, but there's an agreement here in the sense that there isn't an actual like, um, and I kind of I'll stick with the cookies thing because like between me and my friend, the implication isn't that. I mean, it could go either way. You could have a different hypothetical where it is the case, but conceivably you could have like, okay, I don't actually literally expect you to transfer title of the cookies to me once I've done this. It's just you perpetrated a dick move against me by not doing it.
Sure.
Similarly, you could pay somebody for mowing your lawn with cookies, and the withholding could actually be fraud because there is that contract. The contract is the expectation that there's an exchange of title, right? And because of that reason, that's why you can't have a contract without it. It's, by definition, that's what's distinguishing it from these other types of agreements.
Yeah, sure. I think most people would prefer that it would actually be enforceable if you do it like if, for example, if there's a service that's extremely rare or maybe it's one of a kind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say there are two companies or two people. Let's just say there's two people and they're absolute top of their field and they basically perform a one of a kind service. Um, Perhaps even such that the service can't be valued so easily with goods, and they want to write some kind of enforceable agreement so that if one person renders a service and then the other one renders the other service, and in under the current legal system, typically if a service is not rendered, the remedy is money. But there is actually, it's very rare, but there is a provision for something called special performance where if the service is so unique, or if maybe some piece of property is so unique, that the piece of property can be forcibly turned over instead of just remedying with money, or the service can be forced to be performed instead of just remedying it with more money. I know it's a bit of a contrived situation, but it does seem like that's a place where I would prefer if you could enforce service-based agreements.
Well, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear from me that I have absolutely no I don't put any weight on I would like as an argument in the legal realm, right? So like that, I will just out like respectfully, I'll just disregard the argument. Like people would like it if I just don't think that has any bearing. Um, the thing is, the implication matters a lot in what we're talking about here, and that's why the contract theory is the way that it is. We hold as, and I'm speaking on behalf of my understanding of an ideology here. So when I say we, I just mean descriptively. The understanding is that I have of what we're all talking about in the libertarian community is maybe I should just say the Ancap community because I know some pretty dumb libertarians. Is that you can't ever be alienated from your own body. You are your body. Now, you, as a religious person, I understand that you'll be the one exception to that because you might think that there's a soul that's a separate thing from the body. And that may be the case, but in terms of what we can actually ascertain about reality here on Earth, it's the case that our bodies are us. We don't have the capability of making a meaningful distinction between those two things. So you can never be alienated from your body because there's nothing to separate from your body. There's just you are your body. We have that sort of framework in our whole system. You can never justify slavery and all the other corollaries that I think are intuitive. So if you say, well, we do this exchange of mowing the lawn, and I mowed your lawn, but now you didn't mow I want you to be forced to. What you're advocating for there is just unequivocally slavery, because in order for that contract to be fulfilled, the other person they have to be taken control of in a way that violates their self-ownership. And the idea is, well, I own the service now. Well, that would violate the entire theory of property in the first place, because a service isn't a real reified thing that is scarce out in the universe. What it is the body is scarce. The human body is scarce, and the service is just something that scarce thing does. And because the human body, as far as scarce things go, is unique because it has its own ends. It can't be owned. So in order for you to implement this, you would have to take ownership of a human body, which would violate the entire premise of the legal system in the first place. So it would be sort of like if that legal system included the possibility of taking ownership over other people, the whole legal system is built off the foundation that we can't do that in the first place. So it's impossible. It would be a contradiction. The legal system would be contradicting itself by doing that. And that's why a contract of that sort would be an invalid configuration for a contract. But on the other hand, if you were to say, hey, if you don't mow my lawn, you owe me $100, that's a completely reasonable contract in that framework.
Okay, sure. But what if we're talking about a kind of special performance that doesn't entail slavery? I guess you would just object to this for.
There couldn't be such a thing.
Well, let me give you an example. It is possible, for example, that, and you may object to this for other reasons. You might just say, well, it's not a contract because there's no title exchange, and that's fine. But if the agreement that I would like enforced, and when I say I would like, by the way, I understand that that's not like an argument as such, but I do think a lot of people would prefer a system, would have the presupposition that they would prefer a system in which these kinds of things may be possible. That's all I'm appealing to there. But you could imagine a kind of special performance where you have a machine, and this machine can do extraordinary things, and you just need to press the button, and the Hold on one second. Yeah? I already have. I'll walk her again in 30 minutes. Sorry, someone's talking to me. You can imagine that this machine is so, incredible on the exchange that I'll press the button on my special machine to do things to you, and then in exchange you'll press the button on your special machine to do things to me. But then the special performance in this case wouldn't actually require enslaving you at all. I could just go and press the button on your machine, and I would still get what I wanted.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a little bit of a confused example because you're not there. This isn't a question of the special performance as such. Like a ballet performance or a music lesson or brain surgery are examples of special performances, I think. But this is you're actually just talking about the machine. So the contract would be use of the machine, but it would have to be outlined in the contract. So what the contract would look like is I'm going to pay you to put your machine is a scarce object. It's property that gets owned. The contract hypothetically would or could look like I'm going to pay you $100. You're going to use your machine on me. If I give you the $100 and you don't use the machine on me, at the bare minimum, then the $100 was no longer yours. So they have to return the $100. You can also say if I give you the $100 and you don't use the machine on me, then I want then the contract specifies that the ownership of the machine transfers to me. Then that makes sense. Then that would be a contract that was coherent within the system. But you couldn't say anything along the lines of I gave you $100 and you didn't use the machine on me. Now, instead of returning the $100 to me, or in addition to returning the $100 on me, I am entitled to force you to use the machine on me. That would violate the principle of self-ownership, which is an intrinsic foundational part of the legal system. And the legal system would contradict itself if it were to permit such a thing. So that would not be.
That wasn't exactly the hypothetical. The hypothetical was that I'm just going to go and press the button on your machine.
So if you are going to press the button on the machine, this isn't a question of special performance as such. It's more of a question of what are the exact implications of title transfer. Because the machine is like the performance of the machine or the employment of the machine is really the subject of the contract. And so
sure.
I
feel like I need to jump in here. I'm sorry. Special performance, as I understand it, would just cover anything that isn't money. So, for example, if I steal something out of your wallet, it could be the case that I just have to pay you back for it under a typical statist legal system. Like if I steal a pencil out of your wallet, the typical way that this is remedied is just like, well, pencils are not really. I mean, they're a scarce resource technically, but they're not like you can just go buy another pencil for 10 cents. So I'm just going to, pay you $5 and you can go buy another pencil. But I understand that's probably not how it would work in the libertarian sense, because it would still be your pencil and I'm just stealing it from you. And every second that I have it, it's still yours.
Yeah.
But then when you say things like the operation of the machine would be the subject of the contract. But you did say before that partial rights, like the right to do something with something, that's not really real under the legal system. Like there doesn't exist such right that you have the right to press the button, but you don't have the right to own the machine.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So the operation of the machine can be the condition, but the operation of the machine cannot be the subject of restitution in the way that we're talking about it here. So if the person doesn't use the machine on you, then the money that you paid them would be held by them fraudulently, so they'd have to return that to you. And then you could have other stipulations in the contract, and those stipulations can either be valid or invalid. They're not automatically valid just because they're on the contract. So an example of an invalid one is if you don't use the machine on me, you have to kill yourself. That's just not a valid condition. And another invalid thing would be if you don't do it, then I'm going to send the private rights enforcer to press the button for you. So this is not valid because, and this is grounded in the property theory that is foundational to the legal system. You can't own the thing partially. You can't own, like, there's no bundle of rights. So the machine is either the operator or someone else's property, and because it's their property, they're the sole person who gets to decide how it's used. So if I own a lawnmower and I say, if you give me $10 to mow your lawn, and then I mow your lawn, but you don't give me the $10, then $10 of yours is actually mine now, and you're fraudulently holding it. But we can't make this a situation where it's like, okay, I'm going to give you $10 to mow my lawn. You didn't mow my lawn. Now I can take your lawnmower. No. Now I can mow my lawn with your lawnmower and then give it back. Also, no. The $10 has to come back to you. That's the only thing that can be covered. If you add stipulations to the contract, you could validly add the stipulation that if you don't mow my lawn, then I become the owner of the lawnmower. That would be valid if it was in the contract, not automatic. If it was in the contract, it would be. But you couldn't do this like, if you don't do it, if I pay you and you don't do it, I become allowed to come mow my lawn with your lawnmower. But then after I'm done, I have to give it back to you. That would just be like a wishy-washy, make-believe, not grounded in property rights, like configuration that wouldn't be enforceable.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I don't have a disagreement insofar as it seems like all of this would be entailed by the theory. Obviously, I don't accept the theory, and I think it just doesn't seem like a kind of theory that I would like to work with. It seems a little bit rigid, but at the same time, I understand that if that is the theory, that if you're starting with such and such propositions like self-ownership and no such bundle of rights, it seems like it would actually follow all of these things that you're saying. Like I don't think that the theory is contradictory internally. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on it, I guess.
Good. Yeah, that's satisfying to me.
It was satisfying to me too. I had another question for you. This is totally unrelated. Okay. So anarcho capitalists and libertarians seem to not like unions very much. Unions are like a big thing that they talk about. I have often felt as though maybe unions get really weird amounts of special protections by the government. So I understand in that sense, but yeah, I don't know what beyond that, what would be the issue, I guess.
I think that the single greatest cause for why this isn't clear is because the unions have been very effective at propagandizing this slogan that what they are is collective bargaining. And this is not the case. Collective bargaining is an activity that multiple individuals can employ in a coordinated effort. Do you want me to wait?
No, you keep going.
Sorry, I heard a knock at your door.
Oh no, that's my chair creaking.
Oh God, that's a creaky chair.
Yeah.
Okay, so collective bargaining is something that multiple separate individuals can employ. They can coordinate the employment of that, and that's the thing that they can do, and that's great. I think it's okay to bargain collectively. I think there's nothing there. Not only am I I'm generally pro it. I've never encountered in all of the like weird esoteric libertarians I've ever met. I haven't so far met anybody who just is against that as such. So that's, I think, should be made clear. The problem that libertarians have with unions is that unions are not really anything related to collective bargaining at all. Now, historically and in the modern statist sense, I think there's two different ways to approach the critique. So the first way, if we're going to look at modern states, they're given all kinds of protections. Often it's the case that your participation in the union is mandatory. They have these insultingly ridiculous, like, oh, you can opt out. But if you opt out, you still have to pay your union dues. They just go to like a charity that you can select from, like a finite number of charities that it can go to, and so you still have to pay the same amount, but you also sacrifice all of the benefits of being in the union, which is like, okay, well, that doesn't resolve the fact that it's compulsory whatsoever. Um, they're given all kinds of protections by the government. I don't want to get into like which particular legal statute in which countries, but it's when they go on strike, they're protected, especially if government if government employees go on strike. So that's what we have a problem with, because if you're going to do a collective bargaining and you and your employees get together and think, hey, we're working for $10 an hour, we think we're actually worth 12. And the employer goes, yeah, it's cool. I can get behind this. It's not worth the trouble to me to, whatever, fight with you guys. Just do it. But then what happens with unions historically, unions are not doing this collective bargaining thing. What unions do is they'll strike. And then when they're striking, and you actually, like, this was a surprise to me when you read the books about the strikes, and the books about this stuff are always pro-union. So you can sort of get the historical criteria of embarrassment that they're confessing this about themselves. Extraordinary violence against those who attempt to cross the picket line and take up the now available jobs, and violence against the employer and their property. They start destroying the property of the employer. And there's like one of the most common things that you'll hear as a libertarian is like, oh, you just want the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons were this like private law enforcement agency that was prominent in the 1800s, and there's actually still in operation to this day. What they would get hired to do is protect workers who are just trying to go work the now available jobs, and the union workers would be shooting at them and trying to kill them for doing that. There's actually a book I want to pick it up on Amazon. I was just reading the summary, and one of the things that they're talking about right in the synopsis is that the Pinkertons were trying to ferry workers over to this factory by boat, and the unionists were firing firearms at them, and they killed some of the Pinkertons who were just trying to get these people to their job. And then they were destroying tractors and equipment, stuff like that. All of this, so I think that unions are essentially evil across the board. I think there's virtually no exceptions to that whatsoever, and I think that the only reason that that's not clearer to people is because of this propagandizing they do that it's collective bargaining. Nothing about collective bargaining has to do with destroying someone's property or threatening and killing people for taking a job that you voluntarily stopped doing. And there's no contract. If you hire, somebody at your factory, you're not in some sort of a commitment with them where if they decide they don't want to work for you anymore, you're doing something wrong by hiring someone else. That's just like, there's no way in my mind to justify that on any reasonable theory of property rights.
Yeah, sure. I don't even necessarily disagree. It seems like it was basically what I predicted, which is that unions are the form in the modern day of like collective bargaining for workers, and the history of them is pretty bad, and they get a lot of protections by the government that it seems like they don't really deserve. But that in principle, if we were in Ancapistan and I made an organization and I called it a union, and you could voluntarily join, and any employer could just fire someone who joined it if that's what the employer thought was best. Like this, and I just said this is the workers' union. Like, this is not doesn't seem like an issue that you would have. It's just the way that they sort of behave and are treated.
Yeah, I think you just have to look at all the specific interactions that are happening and try to figure out, is there a property rights violation taking place here? And certainly I think that the example you just gave doesn't constitute one. If you want to fire, I mean, from an ANCAP point of view, if you want to fire somebody because of their race or their religion, if somebody was just whistling the wrong song at some point, then absolutely that's a legal thing to do. Now, we almost exclusively almost unanimously is the word I meant to say, think that that's morally reprehensible, it's repugnant, it's abhorrent. We hate that that would ever happen. But legal theory isn't about enforcing what you think people like. It's not a moral thing. It's a legal thing. So um, if somebody wants to fire somebody for that reason, and then they would suffer all kinds of market penalties for doing that. Even if everyone else in the society was sympathetic to racism, there would still be um, consequences that would make them a less competitive firm for doing that. And yeah, I don't think. I guess the direct answer to your question is there's nothing legally wrong about that.
Yeah, sure. Um, I did have just one more topic I wanted to touch on, if you have time. I don't know how
Absolutely.
long it'll take. It shouldn't take too long. Um, and this is the topic of open borders. And so, like I said, I was a kind of a libertarian at one point, and most of the other libertarians that I interacted with online, they were usually pro open borders, or they were more sympathetic to it, certainly, than the average. But I heard a very interesting argument. Again, this is when I was a libertarian, from another libertarian. He was an anarchist as well, and his argument was that insofar as the state is unjustly holding the title of the land that belongs to the people, it wouldn't be just for them to bring in more people to split that land with.
Yeah. So I would say that that particular argument, as you're presenting it there, seems to be invoking a error about the nature of the government. So it's not the case, and it is the case, that the government is holding all of this like property rights, property titles hostage, essentially, or they're acting like they own it. Like I own this house that I'm in, but I pay taxes on it, and if I don't, the government comes and takes it from me. So obviously, there's a real sense in which the government views themselves as the real owner of the house. Um, so I think the most direct answer to that is public property is not owned properly. There is no such thing as collective ownership. And so if the government, if there's a state owned field or a state owned institution of some kind, and they bring in people and put them in there, it's not the case that they're, um, you know, it would be different from if you owned your house and they brought in and they put an immigrant in your house. That would be an extraordinary violation of your property rights. But if
Sure.
there's some state-owned institution and they're housing the immigrants in there, it is the case that by owning a state-owned institution, this public property, they are stopping proper ownership from being realized, and they're holding, I think the expression that some of my colleagues would use is they're holding it in estoppel, like they're preventing it from being put into use. But that's bad. But that is what they're doing. They are preventing it from being owned. And so when they put an immigrant in their own property, the immigrant's presence there isn't like a trespass, so to speak. Because I think in a lot of ways, in order to make that make sense, what you have to be doing is this sort of like collectivism, where the nation of all these individuals have some sort of collective ownership over all the land. I think you might have to go that way to make that make sense, and I would say that I don't find that convincing.
Sure. It certainly wasn't about the first thing that you touched on about like your own property, that like maybe the right way to view property is that the state just owns all of it and then you're like renting it to them via tax. Um, it wasn't about that. It was about the second thing you touched on, which was like quote unquote public property. Um, I think the argument was more just like if, for example, if the state dissolved today, there is some likely owner of this public. Somebody's going to, I think the term is like homestead. Somebody's gonna come into acquisition of this property, um, and if we wait 50 years and um, let's say the population doubles and maybe 30% of those are from other places, then the likely owners has now pretty drastically changed. And it could be the case, even if it's not like under like the legal theory, maybe it's kind of equivalent because in either case the property isn't properly owned and then it comes into ownership, but it could still be morally wrong that you've changed the likely owner of the property.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I would say if we're going to take a step away from the legal side of things, and we're going to talk about morality, it would certainly be the case for my personal morals, and I think that I'm comfortable assuming this is the case for many of my like-minded friends, that, yeah, the state existing is essentially manifesting a constant stream of immoral conditions, and public property representing a sort of freezing property so that it can't be homesteaded is immoral in and of itself. So, like, yes, I think that if you add in the fact that they're using our stolen money to bring in immigrants and put those on the public property, that there's like more complexity. But I feel like what that would be is there's like an ocean of immoral stuff going on, and then the immigrant aspect of that story is really just a ripple on the surface of that huge body of already extant immoral problems.
Um, yeah, sure. I don't. I mean, I guess from your framework, I would agree. I think the only argument that was being made is like, given that this from this anarchist perspective, like the state's existence is already bad. I think they were just saying like we don't need to make it worse by having the state, bring in more people or do more things or potentially like divvy out property to people who um, like if the property was going to be rightfully owned by anyone, it would be the people there. And then if you bring in someone and then you divvy up that property with the someone you've brought in, and the people who would have owned the property didn't want that, it would seem like that would be just kind of like an additional evil on top of the evil cake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a sense in which if your neighbor is Angelina Jolie and she just wants to keep adopting African kids, and you just hate African kids, then there's like an idea is like, well, is she wronging you? Like, is she doing something immoral by filling your neighborhood with African kids, and you just hate them? And I think in that case, it's kind of like a little bit more obvious that like, well, maybe it's not so clear that there's an actual immoral thing happening there. I think in order to get to the point where the importing of people has an immoral character to it, it relies on the context of all those other immoral things happening being the context in the first place.
Yeah, sure. I guess I could give like a counterexample, which is just like, let's say I live in a neighborhood, and I'm the only person for 1,000 miles in any direction, and there's 8 houses.
Terrible neighborhood.
It's a terrible neighborhood. It's actually just me, but there are 8 houses, and presumably, I don't want to say that I know too much, but I would assume if the state dissolved tomorrow, I could claim all of those houses as mine. Like I would. Is
Well,
that correct or?
if the houses are currently owned by the state.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, that wasn't clear. The state built all of them, and I bought one of them. And there's
And
7 that are.
no one's living in them currently.
No one's. There's me. It's just me in my house, and maybe let's say my wife,
Sure.
and then there are 7 other houses, completely unfilled, quote unquote state owned. Um, you would agree that should the state dissolve tomorrow, I can go and I can appropriate all of those houses, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But, so then if the state brings in a bunch of people and they sell those houses to a bunch of people, and no one in the whole country even really wanted it, and then they sell those houses to the 7 people that they've brought in, and then the state dissolves. It seems like, even though it's not actually the case that I ever got to appropriate it, and so I haven't actually been robbed of anything. It does seem like something worse has happened than in the first case where like if anyone was going to be the rightful owner, it was going to be me, and then now that has been changed.
Sure. Yeah, I'm totally sympathetic to that. And I think it's a really good example of why it's so important that people understand that the state's existence is in everything it does, and then in an almost unlimited amount of side effects from all of those things it does directly. The state is changing the way things would have otherwise been, to the point that it's not even, we're not even like within a stone's throw anymore. It's like we live in such a heavily distorted world and economy that we couldn't even really speculate at what it would look like in the absence of the state anymore. And this is just a really good example of how, yeah, absolutely. Like you were in a situation where the circumstances were such that had it not been for the state, you had the opportunity to do a lot of homesteading, let's say. And realistically, I think like we should also point out that in the absence, since we presuppose that the state built those houses, probably what should have happened is there should have just not been houses there at all. Like the houses being constructed in the first place was a misallocation.
That's true. Let's imagine there's just a lot of land that I want to grab. Like the land's just already there, and I've built my house on a part of it, and I just want to grab the rest of it when the state goes.
Yeah,
but instead, the state has sold all of those deeds, and now there's a bunch of other people around me who are going to try to grab it too.
Yeah, yeah. Because when the state does dissolve in this hypothetical, those people are going to be the proper homesteaders of that land that they're now on. But you're right that that wouldn't have been the case if it hadn't have been for the state's involvement. And I think, like I said, it's just a really crystal clear example of why it's so important to be conscious of the fact that this is essentially what anarcho capitalists are saying is happening constantly. And it's not just the case that you don't get the chance to homestead something you otherwise would have. It's also the case that like you have money in the bank right now. Well, tomorrow the purchasing power of that money is going to be much lower, and that's a continuous process that never ends because the state's constantly stealing your wealth. If you like I have a lot of friends who are foodies, and I tell them sometimes we're walking around downtown, and I'll tell them like, they're foodies, and in the hometown we're in, there's like one exotic food place you can go to. Like I like ramen, I like pho. All right, well, there's no ramen around here. I have to drive for 4.5 hours to get ramen, and there is a place to get pho, and it's really good. And that's it. That's cool. If it's not that, it's Burger King and McDonald's, and Burger King gives me gas, so not really a choice. But what I tell my friends is all of these things that the government's doing. Think about how many ways that the government discourages a new restaurant room, right? Like the taxes. So basically, in order to be profitable, a business has to reach a certain threshold of profit to offset it. Otherwise it's accumulating losses, and a business that's experiencing losses is inevitably going to reach bankruptcy. So it has to reach that threshold. Well, how easy is it to meet that threshold if everybody has more spending money? Like, imagine how much more spending money we'd have if we weren't getting taxed in every. You get taxed $1 million or a million different ways for every dollar you get, right? Like my employer pays me for work that I did, and I get income tax, but he got taxed for paying me it, and before he paid me it, he had to complete a contract, and he got the contract got taxed, and you know what I mean. It's just an infinite amount of taxes everywhere, which way. So imagine how much more disposable income everyone would have. So right off the bat, like an unimaginable amount of restaurants that can't make it right now would suddenly be like, maybe this is actually a profitable opportunity for me. And then on top of that, think about property taxes, operating taxes, licensing issues. Like there's just a bazillion things. Think about the fact that like the way things are laid out is all messed up. Like civil planning and stuff like that, because like for example, if you're familiar with Toronto, you probably aren't because you're from somewhere else. The fact is like we have this beautiful location, and one of our like major highways just cuts right down. It's just like an ugly one of those like overhead things. It's just like all the waterfront property is just like there's just this big stupid highway right through the middle of it. Right, that's a central planner thing. Think of how much better the situation would have been without that interference, right? Think about like what businesses would have been profitable. So what you're asking about here in regards to the way that you lose this opportunity to homestead is exactly the same way that when I'm walking down the street with my friend, we have lost the opportunity to eat at all these fine restaurants and a million other things. But the tricky thing about economics is that I think really is the major stumbling block for most people is it's always easy to see the things that you get on the positive side. So taxes get taken out of your bank account, and you can see that. And then you get a fire department built, well, you can see the fire department. But not easy to understand is, what did you lose on the other side? Because these are things that are unrealized, and you have to really get intimate with the theory to even start to like develop the capability of seeing what those losses look like and how they measure up against what those positive detectable things are like.
Yeah, sure. I'm familiar enough with Austrian economics in principle. I mean, I don't know the super fine details, but I understand the arguments pretty well, and I'm not opposed. I'm sure you would be, but I'm not opposed, for example, to a government that sort of does the bare minimum necessary. I believe that the government has to exist under my religious worldview to constrain evil. Basically, that there are things that people ought not do, and the government should stop them from doing it. But then outside that, like the amount of government interference that goes on, I would agree, could be kind of a lot more than necessary. And we would maybe find some agreement there that, maybe the amount of licensing and taxing and everything that goes on, and the number of services that are provided by the government that maybe don't need to be. I'm totally open to the idea of just like a very small government.
Yeah, that really invokes something interesting to me, which was you kind of had like a minarchistic way of describing that there. And there's three things I want to say. First of all, there are a lot of my colleagues who are religious. So objectivists are obviously not religious. I'm not an objectivist, but I'm also an atheist, and a lot of Ancaps are religious. So I'm in this sort of weird middle ground, I suppose. My point is, I'd be really interested to see some of my religious colleagues have a chat with you about why there's a difference in interpretation. But I do want to say this I got 2 points about that thing you just said about minarchism, and those 2 points are this. You said something along to the effect of you think the state is necessary for the suppression of evil. And I would say 2 things. One, I think the state is obviously doing a tremendously poor job of doing that, because they're not suppressing the just natural individualistic evil, but they're also propagating enormous amounts of evil. And then on top of that, I think there's this whole category of evil that can't even be possible without the government, and it's evil at the greatest scale. Because when we see things like ethnic cleansing or nuclear bombs, those are things that states do for reasons that would never make sense without states being involved in the first place. So I think that if somebody were of the opinion that their religious beliefs compel them to minimize evil, I would say that endorsing the state is extremely counterproductive to minimizing evil. And I usually don't like to get into the empirical stuff because I'm an Austrian. I can't count, and I do observations bad. But in this case, I think actually that virtually every conceivable observation throughout history of every state would corroborate that position.
That's interesting. The first thing, I feel like maybe I said it wrong, I'm not sure. It is not the case that I'm saying that the state must exist, because without the state, there would be more evil. I do believe that the state exists to constrain evil. Like, that's the job of the state, and that's why the state has been instituted. So when you say like, well, the state's doing a bad job, maybe that's true. That's probably pretty true. But it's not as if I could have that proposition that the state has been instituted for the purpose of constraining evil, and then just say that, well, let's get rid of the state, right? Getting rid of the state would be contradictory to the belief that the state exists to constrain evil.
I don't know about that. I don't know that that's the case. Couldn't it be the case that more than one? Okay, so there can be things that are alternatives to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
There can be things that can be alternatives to each other, and there can be things that are alternatives to each other that have a similar purpose also. So, like for
Mm-hmm.
example, I can only afford one car, or I only have space in my driveway for one car. But whatever car I get, I'm gonna just use it to get to work. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, sure.
so it seems to me that even if it is the case that the state exists to contain evil, which I supremely disagree with, I think the state exists to propagate evil. So that's probably an interesting point of divergence. But even if it was the case that the state exists to contain evil, I would say that wouldn't lead to the conclusion that you're engaged in a contradiction by promoting the cessation of the state, because there can be alternatives that are also um, effective at or intended to contain evil that just do a better job. And I don't think there's anything logically necessary about the inversion of that.
That's possible, but then if God came down to you and he was like, here's a car, I'm going to give you a car so that you can get to work, and then you're like, nah, I'll just walk, that would be weird.
Well, I mean, like if I actually like if I just got out of a doctor's appointment where they're like, dude, you need to start walking, or you're gonna have a heart attack, and then God gave me a card, I'd be like, what, dude? If you didn't like cure my heart disease, and if you don't cure my heart disease, I got to trust the doctor here. I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me as an atheist to get into that because I think there's like so many presuppositions like that we just wouldn't have in common.
Sure.
But I have to say, like, no, I think I'll give the floor back to you there because I may have lost my point there in responding to the card thing.
Yeah, that's all right. I guess the only thing that I would say is that even if it's the case that an anarchist society would be better, which I'm completely not convinced of, I do think that the counterfactuals are very hard to think about in terms of like what would have happened had we not had the state. It's you can talk about it, but it would be very difficult to like prove to anybody, and that's why I think people like things like argumentation ethics, because the idea of argumentation ethics would be that like you can demonstrate that you ought to be an anarchist absent any empirical data, but insofar as the state is like a pragmatic solution to a perceived problem, which I think is how most people would view it. That's like if the state is just kind of inevitable, which I do think it is. I just think there are too many people who they don't want to think about anything other than the world that they're in. Then it would still be the case that like the state would have virtuous ends and vicious ends, and you could imagine that the state would still have an obligation to act as virtuously as possible, or the people in it could still be like morally bound to behave certain ways.
Well, not in a way that I think is like necessary, like not in a way that I think you can only get from the state. But here's something that I think you can only get from the state. And I'm going to try maybe in vain to bridge the gap here to speak to you on like a religious level. But like I imagine, like you said, like what if God gives you a car? Well, here's a more interesting question, I think. Like, what if God just shows up and without any explanation, he's like, and maybe this isn't that unrealistic because I think a lot of people believe this is exactly what happens when you die, in some form or another. What if God's like, hey, not even implying I did wrong or good. He just shows up and he goes, okay, justify what you've been up to. And I go, well, I wanted to minimize evil. So we institutionalized theft and violence and we started blowing each other up. I mean, like to me, it's like, oh, well, that probably, for me, that would be Not a good answer. I would expect to fail that test.
Yeah, sure, but you're coming at it from the presupposition that I assume you when you mentioned theft, right? Are you talking about taxation? Yeah, sure, but then when you apply that to my specific religious framework, you have things like render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God's. Um, there is a heavy implication in the New Testament that like um, you you're a steward of sorts. God has given you certain things, but God has also given the state the right to take some of those things away for certain ends, and that's just the way it works. Like you don't actually own in a libertarian property theory sense. You don't own the things that you have. They're just things that God has given to you, and as God giveth, God can taketh away.
Um, you don't own the things that are in your possession because you're just the steward of those things.
Yeah.
So I'm having a hard time relating that back to I'm trying to do right by God, and the best I could come up with was institutionalizing theft and aggression and property rights violations, and I support an institution that like kills people.
But when you say, I mean, we can address the other ones after. But when we start with the first one, which is theft, it's like there's no implication in the Christian ethics paradigm that taxation would actually constitute theft or aggression, because the money that comes from the government is not yours in the sense of libertarian property.
In the Christian paradigm, as you interpret it, is it the case that like my body can be given up to Caesar?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, under certain circumstances, sure.
So against my, I mean, like specifically against my will, like so.
Yeah.
In your interpretation,
not in all cases, but yeah.
No, not in all cases, but the state could conceivably, justifiably enslave me or kill me. Without
I was going to go with the kill one.
Yeah, and I don't mean like the death penalty because I'm a mass murderer.
Oh, I did mean that, but I didn't. The word mass doesn't need to be included.
Yeah, so like I just mean, so I would have to.
It wouldn't be the case.
I would have to do something bad for the state to be justified in killing me.
Yeah.
Okay, so why is that distinction there? Like where you like so absent of the crime, where are we deriving like what appears to be self-ownership?
Well, because God pretty clearly ordains the state to do taxation, but he does not clearly ordain the state to just kill people.
No, but what I mean is like you're saying it's okay to kill somebody once they've killed somebody else.
Yeah.
So up until the point that they've killed somebody else, it wasn't okay to kill them.
Yeah.
Okay, so that to me sounds like we're talking about self-ownership now.
Well, no, because it is still the case that God owns you, and you're still just a steward of your own body.
Yeah, well, I guess like there's a lot of people that I watch on YouTube that are interested in the atheist to theist debate, but I think like if you enter the conversation with the presupposition that God owns you, then probably like you're sort of opting in a sense to that category that we spoke to at the very beginning of the call, where you're like, I just can't be reasoned with, because I don't mean that in a condescending way, but there is obviously, in a very literal sense, there's nothing I can say to get over that. Like I can't make an argument to separate you from the presupposition that God actually is the owner of me and I'm just property of that entity.
I would agree in a limited sense, only insofar as people with conflicting presuppositions can never reason with each other. But when you say like, I can't be reasoned with, well, another Christian could reason with me and we could debate about all sorts of things.
So a Christian has the capability of convincing you that God does not have ownership over you.
Well, they could attempt to make the argument. We could discuss it on equal
No, but
terms.
if they don't have the capability of actually, like, because I could make an argument, I could attempt to make the argument too. But if you're just of the opinion ahead of time that even another Christian could not convince you that God did not own you, then I don't think that would make a. I think that would essentially be the same situation as I'm in.
It depends on how you're. When you say I'm of this opinion ahead of time, I derive this opinion from my theological beliefs and from my belief in Scripture. It's not actually a, like a foundational axiom that God owns me. It's the foundational axiom is the Christian ethics paradigm, and I pop it open and I look inside, and my understanding of it
So how
will
did
reveal all
you
of these things that I've described.
how did you get to that then? If it's a deductive conclusion rather than a presupposition.
Um, well, I just think it's pretty clear in Scripture, like in Romans 13, when it says that the ruler does not bear the sword in vain, and the ruler, which is back then they would say ruler because there was just like one governor in the region, but this is more of this would generalize to the state.
No, I meant more like how did you get to the conclusion that it was true, not like what
the Christian ethics paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would take that would be a very long conversation. I don't know how much time we have.
Okay, well, without any pushback from me, just give me like what's your number one reason that you attribute to why you come to believe that is the case.
Here, I'll give you two.
Okay.
So the first reason is that even if it is the case that the Christian paradigm is completely incorrect, it couldn't be more incorrect than any other ethical paradigm because, as far as I can tell, all ethical paradigms are just made up. It's fictionalism, right? It's just like I have some preferences, and all my norms are just means to an end. So you could coherently just say like, well, I'm an atheist, but I still believe in Christian ethics, because it's no less valid a less valid end than any other means to any other end.
Okay.
But then the argument I would make for the truth of Christianity would be maybe more like a transcendental argument, but I don't really do religious debates.
So that's like the tag they call it.
Yeah, the tag.
Just I'm not going to get into it with you. Just remind me which one's the tag.
Well, the tag would be. This is very controversial. I think it's sound. Not everyone thinks it's sound. I'll be upfront about that. But the tag would be something like, for knowledge or truth to exist, it would have to be certain things would have to be the case, right? We could imagine, for example, the universe has to be like roughly stable enough for you to understand it. You need to be able to explain like the existence or the ontology of the laws of logic, right? Like what are these things that we're appealing to when we talk about logic? And the claim would be that the Christian paradigm, and there are all sorts of other things, but the claim would be that the Christian paradigm uniquely satisfies these, and therefore you ought to believe in Christianity.
This is also called presuppositionalism, right?
That would be one name for it, presuppositional apologetics.
Gotcha.
But the argument isn't like isn't just like, well, you can't know anything, so like just believe in God. It's like knowledge does exist, but this would only be the case if God exists.
So I'm not going to go there with you, but I just want to.
Yeah, I don't want to go there either.
I just want to know, like, so is it your position that if somebody were able to convince you that the transcendental argument was fallacious, that would change your position on this, or would that not change your confidence level whatsoever?
It could change my position. It's usually the primary argument I would appeal to. I don't know. I would, even if it wasn't the case, I would have to check, like, just make sure I haven't missed anything. But yeah, that would be the main argument that I appeal to. But the condition for someone to refute the transcendental argument was they would need to present me a worldview that is more coherent or cohesive and like adequately explains everything that needs to be explained. And if they could do that, I would say, good job.
Sweet. Yeah, like I said, I think we both don't want to go down that way, but I wanted to have an understanding because it seems to be unavoidably the direction that your, I guess, logic flows in. So I thought it would be appropriate to sort of get an idea. So I'm going to scroll it there. All right. So that was a pretty decent length of conversation. I hope that my questions were my answers to your questions were reasonable. I appreciate it a lot. Like I said at the beginning, my hope is I want to become, whether or not I stay in ANCAP, even I think should be up in the air if I'm being truly epistemically responsible.
Hmm.
But my main goal is to sort of document the process of going from completely useless in discussing the topic to hopefully in the future less so. And I think this was a perfect place for me to start. So thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'll follow up in a little while, like a week or two maybe, and see if we have the opportunity to pick something specific and hone in and have another chat.
Yeah,
But
sure.
this is super productive for me. So I think that probably is it for me. If there's anything else you wanted to say or have the last word, and then we'll call her.
No, I think that's it. Yeah, I don't make content, but I will make content. So under the same name, Lumethos. So
Sweet. Well,
if
if you want to retroactively, like once you do that, send it to me. I'd be happy to put it in the description, or we can even do
yeah,
like a collab
I have
thing.
a like a channel and a Twitter account that you can just put. I'll send it to you on Discord.
Sweet. All right,
Um,
I'll do one of those collaboration things then, where we both get, it'll be like we both collaborated
oh
on.
yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, we can look into that. Anyway, yeah, that's all I had. So thanks for the chat. I thought it was good.
Likewise, I had a good time. All right, I'll end the recording here. Let's see if I can do this properly. No, don't play the outro.